We're ready.
Okay.
We go.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing tonight? This afternoon, this evening?
Well, doing well.
Great.
Well, wonderful.
Great.
Great. Hello, everyone.
Well.
Well, we are so glad that you all are joining us today for this afternoon of a marriage forum. You know, our objective, Danny and I, we are transparent. And we hope that with whatever that is put before you today, that you don't have a problem in being transparent as well. That's the only way we're going to be able to help other young couples that are coming up, that are prospectively thinking about getting married, to realize that this thing called marriage that we are in is taken lightly, and it requires a lot of work. So that's what we're going to get into today. Faye, you got something to say?
And we have with us today a wide range of marriages from 3 years to 40 years. So we're hoping that within this forum, all of us will get an opportunity to glean something from each other. It's going to be interesting, and I'm looking forward to it.
So without any further ado, we're going to introduce to each of you Dr. Faye Weems Singleton. She is a psychotherapist. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist in Atlanta, Georgia. We have been friends for over 34 years. Forever. So we have seen each other go through many trials. So without holding up any time, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Faye.
Good evening. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon, because this is a very, very important discussion. You know, the Whitfields have shared with you over and over again their thesis. Marriage takes work, and we know that is not just a mantra, that it is a fact. And so this evening, I first want to thank each of you, each couple, for being here tonight, for being willing to be transparent and vulnerable, because your stories are sacred. And I offer that in the very beginning, because for you to share any part of your story, that is a gift. And so what you're offering is a sacred gift to the world by sharing this information, whatever nuggets you decide to share here tonight. So tonight's going to be a little unique. It's a loving, casual conversation that I'm going to facilitate. I'm not going to be your therapist tonight, but I will guide the conversation. I am open to answer questions, but I'm going to ask you all some questions and I will guide it. And since we have 6 couples, I will interject sometimes to kind of move us along, because we want to make sure that all the couples get a chance to talk. And we want to hear both the feminine voice and the male voice. So I will kind of help to move things along, so to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity. So couples, I want you to sit back and breathe, because a little birdie told me somebody was nervous. I'm not going to call anybody out, but I want you all to just relax. And so the first question is going to be a very simple question. I'll call you and by your last name as a couple. I want you to introduce yourself, because in case you're not, I informed all my couples I work with. So there are people listening. I didn't just inform couples, I informed persons who were thinking about getting married, persons who've been married, but maybe thinking about getting married again. So introduce yourself, tell us how long you've been married, and what you want to tell us that you think is important about your marriage. So giving you about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll move on, because you're going to get a chance to share much, much more about yourselves as we go on and answer questions. So the Carpenters, you're up first.
Okay. My name is Faye Carpenter. This is my husband, Roger Carpenter. We've been married for 17 years. We live in Orlando, Florida. I'm not sure what you want to know about me. I've been in education for 25 years. I'm a principal at an elementary school here in Orlando. So when it comes to what is it we would want younger couples to know, I have had conversations with the Whitfields throughout our marriage. I mean, they've been a part of our lives as long as he and I have been together. And what I would say is, or what I've learned is that within the first 5 to 6 years of marriage, I think those are like the hardest, I'll say, for us, because we had to learn really how to bring two houses and make them one. His values, my values, to merge together. And those were the roughest years, I think, for us. So what I would say to young couples, because now looking back, we've learned to do that just through day-to-day experiences, learning to know each other and making God our center. So in looking back, what we thought was so hard now it seems like water under the bridge. So what I would say is just hold on, stay in prayer, and look to God, because truly what was so big then seems so small now. And if you hold on and get through those days, you can look back together. Like now, we can look back over those years that we thought were so hard, and it just doesn't seem as big now as it may have seemed then.
Thank you. Brother Carpenter, you want to add anything to that?
Well, just what she said.
Okay, ditto. Okay, I'm gonna give you that one this time.
Okay.
Taylors.
Hi, everyone. I am Adrienne Taylor, and this is my husband, Gabriel Taylor. We are actually in a very unique situation because we are newlyweds for the second time. So we actually got married in 2010, and we had, trials and issues, and it ended up in divorce. And we got remarried this year. So we have now been married for 7 months for this second go round. I would say the biggest lesson I've learned from our first marriage and now going into newlywed life part 2 is there is no I in team. And I can, speak for myself, where that was one thing that I really had to learn, that when you get married, it's a partnership. You have become one. And so because you're partners, that's not your enemy. That is the person that you've pledged your life to. That's the person that you know is always going to have your back. And so you should treat it that way, that you're a team and that you're one. April, you want to add to that?
No, just hello, everyone. Only thing that I could add is we met in college when we were 17. We got a little bit more serious when we were about 18 or 19. We started going to church together in our teenage years. So God has always been a part of our relationship. We attend church together all the time now. And of course, I don't know if she mentioned it, we're expecting our second daughter.
Oh, neat. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Wonderful. Thank you. The McGills.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gerald McGill, and this is my wife, Karen. We're so glad to be here with you all this evening. We've been married for 24 years. Wonderful marriage. And what I would say, a nugget to leave would be to keep outside forces outside. So many times we intertwine outside forces, whether it be friends, family, into our marriages. And that's a grave mistake. So if I had a nugget to leave with anybody, whether it be seasoned couples, younger couples, keep outside forces outside.
Thank you.
I agree. However, again, I'm Sharon. I prefer to be called Shell. As Gerald said, we've been married 24 years. I agree with the Taylors. Those first few years are your challenging years. I think no matter how much you date, until you're married, you really don't know the whole man, the whole woman, because a lot of times you don't see things, you don't experience things with that person until you are with them in a committed state. And so I'm personally big on communication. I always tell my husband that I love communication, compassion, care. Those are my 3 C's. And I believe that if we incorporate those 3 things into our marriage, those things that come behind that will work out. I look at sometimes marriage like a light bulb. Light bulbs go out. But because the light bulb goes out, you can't go out and buy another house. What you do is you buy another light bulb and you replace it. So if there's anything in the marriage that is going out, we have to find a way and that will to replace it to make our marriage better.
What you say?
Unmute.
Kids.
Okay.
Down in the lower left-hand corner.
Who's the couple? I don't think the couple heard.
Did you call one of them by name?
The Moores. The Moores.
Okay, the Moores. Okay.
We couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yep, no problem. Sorry about that.
You want to start, babe?
Well, hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Pamela Moore, and this is my husband, Arnett Moore.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been married for 38 years. Yeah, it's been a long ride, but it's been a great ride. One of the things my husband and I like to tell young couples and even those who are preparing for marriage, have a friendship first. Mm-hmm. Because as my husband often says, there are times you might get mad with your husband, but if that's your best friend,
or with your wife,
mm-hmm. If that's your best friend, you're not gonna stay mad long, because that's your confidant, that's your buddy, that's the one that's always there for you, you know. And so if your husband or your spouse in general is your best friend, then you got a situation there that if one is on the blink, you can refer to the other. So be friends first of all.
Mm. I like Shale's analogy. Is it Shale?
Yeah.
Shale?
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, though, right?
Yes.
I love your analogy of changing the light bulb rather than changing the house. It's a whole lot easier to repair something that, you know, a utensil that breaks, or or something along those lines than to have to go out and buy a whole new edifice or something along those lines. And the emotional things that take place along those lines, trying to replace the house, so to say, you know, can have its toll on you in the long run. Our situation has been interesting in that I think the issues that we've probably had to overcome more have kind of surfaced later on in the marriage. I think our first few years were really easy, you know, by comparison. Now there were some things that I think that took place with us that kind of drove us together, you know, and I'm certain if you've ever gone through traumatic experiences as a couple, those things tend to have its cohesive capacity. They have the capacity to kind of drive you to each other rather than separate you from each other. So I think early on, those kind of experiences we went through really were forging our relationship more so than doing anything else. It's interesting now, and I don't know if I don't think there's very few of you all on here that may be parents that have experienced, that are starting to experience life as empty nesters. That's really when our situation is really kind of taking a flip. And I think it's interesting because for all those years of raising children, the one thing that I would always respond to when people would ask me how I'm doing, I would always respond, I'm just ready to get my life back. And by that, I mean, you know, as parents, we just pour ourselves into our children. I know we were really active with our children coming up, and, you know, it seemed like we were going to a basketball game or going to a concert and that kind of thing. So as we grow, now we kind of have to learn to kind of go back and cope with each other now. And that's kind of been where I think our biggest adjustment, I won't call it a challenge, but it's really been an adjustment, having to learn to live with each other again. You know, so I think that's one of the things that we're facing right now, and hopefully we're gonna be all right.
Thank you so much. The McGhees.
What up? So I'm Darrick McGhee.
I'm Tikia.
We've been married 17, actually next Tuesday will be 18 years of marriage. Well, actually next Monday, I'm sorry, will be 18 years of marriage. And so we were college sweethearts at FAMU. And we are best friends, love doing life together. So my nugget for couples is easy. Just listen to whatever I tell you, it works out. No, seriously, in all seriousness. I will tell you a couple of things that for me, we had a conversation last night. So the first thing is, and it was mentioned earlier, really is having Christ as a foundation. And that was important. Secondly, is marry your best friend. I mean, that really, really matters when you marry that person. And when we got married, we didn't have anything. And so all I had was a lot of promises to make to her that I would do some things a certain way. And she believed in me. And the Lord has seen fit to bless those things. And so we've had some tumultuous times, especially early in our marriage, but our friendship withstood. And so I think that's important.
My nugget would be marriage is not always easy, but it's worth it. It's worth it at the end of the day to come home and know that your spouse is there waiting on you, or knowing that they want to come home and not are trying to find other avenues to divert them from coming home, and always never stop dating each other.
God's.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Scott. This is my wife, Lasagna. We have been married for 14 years. We got married in 2006. We were both college students, but we didn't really meet each other until after college at FAMU. And so we actually met each other in church. And we got married and tender age of 24 and 25, and been married ever since. And so, you know, one of the biggest things that I always learn about marriage is the practicality of it. The biggest nugget I will always leave with anyone pursuing to get married is not to ever forget, like Ms. McGhee was saying, the dating, the having fun with your spouse, because life is going to happen. You know, things will go up, things will go down. You're going to have kids, you're going to have all these other things, jobs change, and everything will start to get on your plate. When we got married, there was nothing on our plate but us and 2 jobs. And now you got ministry, you got work, you got kids, you got all these other different things that will try to come in and be a part of your agenda and take up space. And what you have to understand is that the devil will use that to drive a wedge in between you. And we got to just make sure at all times that we don't forget to have fun, to always bring it back to us 2, have that date night, because it was us 2 that started off, and before any of this other stuff. And that's where it's going to finish, you know? So I would always say, never forget to always have fun with your relationship, never have fun with your wife, have fun with your husband, and remember that it's always you 2, you know? Don't ever bring anybody else into it. It's always going to be you guys.
Well, what he said, I can add to it a little bit. I mean, what I would say, because, you know, we are blessed. We have 3 little girls, you know, a set of twins that will be 5 next week. And we have, our oldest is 8 years old. But I guess a nugget I would like to say, because it has been 14 years, we had to add it up before we started, you know. But
it gets a blur after a while. You just live from day to day and just keep going.
But a nugget I would say is that when you get married, it's not the joining of 2 worlds, but it's more so the abandoning of 2 worlds, that you all can come together and create one that works for you. He was raised in Atlanta, and I was raised in
Weelaca, Florida. Very small country town in the middle of Florida. Didn't even know it existed.
Oh, but don't despise a day of small beginnings. However, you know, but either way, he was raised one way, I was raised one way. So we have to come together for what works for us and what works for our house. And then also I would tell them to make sure that you have and keep a spirit of forgiveness in your home and in your hearts, as well as humility, and take that pride and throw it out the door. Like it can't even come in here. But that's the nuggets I would leave for people to take.
Wow, thank you all. You all have all touched on a little bit of what some of the questions that me and the Whitfields wanted to put at you tonight. So I want to start with given the fact that we have such a nice range in terms of 3 years to 38, and I have to add the Whitfields in there 40. Since we have this broad range, I like for the Carpenters to help us with, because you brought up a very important topic about the first years. And so those can follow, others can follow you regarding those first years. What one big challenge that you would want to share with those listening that would help those listening to know that marriage does take work, and there are things that happen in those first few years, and I think of it in terms of seasons. There's something that happens in that first season. You know, sometimes we go into it thinking it's all summer, spring and summer, and some first few years start out like winter, not even fall. So if you could just share a little bit with us how you all overcame that season.
Okay, so I can go ahead and say we overcame because, you know, I can say that okay, so let me just tell you some of the harder things, first of all. Some of the harder things someone mentioned earlier, communication. We had to learn how to effectively communicate. And that was a struggle for us in the first few years, because I find myself to be pretty dominant, and my husband is dominant as well. So we had to find a platform that we could communicate on evenly, and where we were actively listening to each other, because I felt like I was speaking my truth. He felt like he was speaking his truth, but we weren't listening to each other. I was listening for him to end his sentence so I can say what I needed to say. And he was doing the same. So we were getting nowhere. So we had to learn to communicate, and throughout all of that, it took a lot of, I'm going to say involuntary prayer, because a lot of it through me, I had nowhere else to go but to pray about it. Also, I would speak to, and Rhoda and I have been friends since 1996. And when I say that she knew me when I met my husband, she does. And so a lot of times I would call her and she would give me advice, and I would find that, and over the years I found that I wasn't the only one that went through these things, that this is a common thing in marriage. And that's why I say that in looking back in those first years, and you find that communication, you got to learn to communicate. You got to learn how to pray together. You have to learn how to pray for each other. You have to learn to actively listen to each other and value each other. I know his dreams. I pray for him and his dreams, and him me. So we had to learn to do that over the course of years, and it took time. So that's why I always say, when you look back, those things that seem so big and problematic then, you find that every marriage, or most marriages, kind of went through the same thing, and you just have to find your way. And for me, finding my way was going to Christ. My way was me and my husband learning to pray together. We had already made up we were staying together. Someone said it's easier to just work it out. Yeah, we had to find a way to work it out, because there was no starting over. So yeah, that communication, learning to communicate, learning to be active listeners, and valuing what he said. I had to learn, and I'll say it was hard for me to actually sit back and take the time to really listen to what he was saying, as opposed to, like I said, waiting until he finished so I can say what I needed to say. I had to
trying to
figure out,
respond.
right, the source of why he was saying what he was saying, or feeling the way he was feeling, and then respond to that.
Someone else chime in regarding the first few years?
Well, I don't have much to add. I mean, you put it out there perfectly. You know, we have to learn how to communicate with each other, and you know, once we learn how to communicate, things gotten a lot better.
Things have gotten a whole lot better, because we've learned to disagree, and we've learned to communicate. And I don't know how honest we're trying to be here, but we've had times where we've had miscommunications where I don't want to talk to you, and he doesn't want to talk to me, and I don't want to see you, and I don't, we've had that, but we've learned that really got us nowhere.
Right.
So we've learned to go ahead and talk about it when we were ready to bring it to the forefront and move on from there.
I tell you, our relationship got a whole lot better once we dedicated our life to Christ, and when we had Bible study, throughout a weekly basis. Things changed dramatically. I mean, I couldn't tell you how things changed. We looked at each other and said things has gotten kind of scary because of the blessings that
it was so
we
good.
received from God. And so, I wanted to continue to dedicate time to God with our Bible studies and things of that nature. And of course, ultimately, we want to live together and a long, healthy, happy life. I mean, that's our ultimate goal.
Yeah, and the Bible study is right. We took a challenge for a year to read the Bible, and we involved our children. We have 2 children, a 13 and 16-year-old as well. And so that Bible study we created with them, we had it every night with our family. And things did start. They got so good that it literally was scary. And someone else mentioned that the higher you go up, the devil will try to put wedges in and try and put roadblocks in. And we recognized that going in. So we just prayed harder. So yeah, I would say, to answer your question, we learn to communicate, we learn to listen, and I'm gonna always end any question with, we always take our problems to God. We pray together.
Yeah, you gotta put him first. That's the bottom line. Once we put him first, everything in our lives changed from that point.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being transparent as well. I was wondering if the Taylors would like to add something because of being, married for 3 years and then divorced. Would you like to add anything about those early years difficulties?
I would say for us, our challenge was kind of twofold. Number one, as for me, I had to get out of that mode of marriage isn't having basically a long-term boyfriend. When you get married, that's a completely different dynamic. So my first response when things weren't going my way was, well, if you don't like it, you can leave. As if this was my boyfriend, because we were dating for a very long time before we got married. And so I had to get out of that and come to the conclusion within myself that no, this is my husband. So there is no, when I don't like it, when there's an argument, you got to leave. So having that communication in place where we can really talk through our issues rather than, as the other couple was saying, talking just to be right rather than listening to what your spouse is really saying. And then the other thing, we are very similar to the Scotts in that Gabriel is from Atlanta also, and I'm from Tallahassee. So I would be the small town and he's, the big city. So our lives were completely different. And coming from, I guess, according to Gabriel, the small town where everybody knows each other and my family's very close. Whenever there was an issue, I would, because I was so used to being so close with my family, I would go straight to my family. And I saw it as I'm just venting. But to my family, it was, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. You need to leave. This is horrible. And you have moved on after you've gotten it off your chest. But because you've gone to other people in your relationship, now the thing that was a molehill has turned into a mountain. And it got to a point to where the mountain kept building and building and building until we ended up in divorce. So for me, it wasn't until after we got a divorce and I had that time to really not just be mad at Gabriel about what happened, but actually really think about, well, what was my part in this? That I started to do things like going in prayer and seeking out mentors like Mrs. Whitfield, who was really instrumental in showing me that as a godly wife, these are things that you can do to improve the next time you consider getting married. So I would say now, this time around, things are a lot better for us because I've really learned what my role is as Gabriel's wife, rather than treating it as if this was my glorified, boyfriend upgraded, if you will. All
I
right.
mean, I would just say, I like to think of it as good seed and good soil. So when we first got married, we came in with good seed, but I don't think we planted ourselves around good soil. So both our parents had been divorced. We were around a lot of divorced people. We were very young. Hardly any of our friends were married. So try to surround yourself by people that's going to nurture you. We had people in our lives that were like that, but I guess a lot of times you're not listening to that crowd. You listen to the people that are your age. So it takes a lot. I felt like I was ready. I felt like I brought good seed, but I don't feel like I was on good soil at the beginning.
So far, what I've heard is that we've got to learn how to listen and listen to understand as opposed to listen to defend.
Absolutely.
Then I've also heard that when it comes to marriage, your problems should stay amongst yourselves. Of course, if there's anything harmful, that's a different story, but you should always stay within the marriage, or else you're going to have difficulties with regard to problems and issues.
And can I say something? Sure. A lot of times people feel like they can just go to people and say, well, can I talk to you? And a lot of times you really just want them to be a sounding board. but they want to put their 2 cents in. And we have to be careful about who we invite or allow to invite themselves into our marriage, because if you invite them once, they will invite themselves twice. And then the other thing is we go and we share in hopes that somebody will share something of wisdom with us. And then when we look down the road, like Miss Taylor said, we're back on track, but now you got a problem with my spouse. So we have to be very careful of who we share with. We really do.
And I piggyback on that too, Ms. Whitfield. Two things that I've learned, and even I tell people who are thinking about getting married is you have to really find that person you trust. And what I mean by find that person, that couple that you both trust, because again, I can have my friends who's going to always tell me my side of the story or tell me or justify that I'm right. And Lasagna have her side. But when you get married, you need to find that couple that you can be real with. That couple that don't mind saying you was wrong in this, even though you're telling the side of the story. A lot of times we go to friends who, just like the Bible says, itching ears. You want to find somebody that's they'll puff up you, right, saying that you were fine, you were right, even though you know you were wrong, and they know that you was wrong, but because they're your friend, they're gonna tell you that you was right. You need to find that person that's gonna be real with you, that couple that's gonna be real with you, that's gonna say, both y'all sound like children, and y'all need to get this right. And a lot of times marriages don't have that. A lot of people, especially young people today, because marriage is not popular. So a lot of people who are young getting married don't really have that young couple that they can really trust with, they can really trust and be real with. And so I think it's very, very important that you have and that you surround yourself with that older couple or that more seasoned marriage that has been through it. It don't necessarily have to have been divorced, or they don't necessarily have to even have a great marriage, but somebody's going to tell you the real thing. The Bible says iron sharpens iron. So somebody's going to be willing to cut you and tell you that you're wrong and tell you that your wife was right. You need to set up and listen to her. And so a lot of times, you don't want some person that's going to say you right all the time. You got to have that person going to be real with you.
That's right.
As I'm hearing that, I'm reminded of the charge that I in doing weddings, and I know my pastor, Pastor Kenneth, has given for every wedding that he's ever done. And there's a charge that he gives to the congregation, to the witnesses of the marriage, that everybody within the sound of his voice, you are now charged with the responsibility to do everything you can to uphold this wedding that you came to witness. And so in many instances, what happens when the venting takes place, we tend to go to somebody who either didn't get that charge or doesn't understand the responsibility that came with that charge. And so subsequently, what you end up with is somebody that ultimately is content with hearing your side and supporting you, as opposed to looking at it from a very objective standpoint and doing and saying what needs to be done in order to foster the proper relationship within the marriage. And so as I was listening to what Adrian was saying, a lot of what happens in that situation is when we share those things with our relatives, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, or somebody like that, and they kind of absorb all of that. But by the time you go back home and y'all have worked it out, that absorption process that took place in them, it stays. And so now subsequently, as Marcus was saying, now you got folks looking at your spouse all cross-eyed, and y'all on another page, And so it's important that we understand that those people that we confide with are really those people that we can look to help support us, even if it means telling me, yo, dude, you was wrong. Mm-hmm. Just fess up and say what you got to say and go back home and get it right with your wife. you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's one of the important things. We got to understand the charge, the responsibility that those who were listening to, or those who are listening to us, the responsibility they have in helping matters, not just listening to you.
Thank you for that. I want to make sure that, because we talked about couples early on, but we've got couples who've been married 14, 17 and more years. So I want to, before we get to the lengthier, those couples who've been married 14, 17 years, where would you say the next obstacle came? Because we do know that marriage does evolve in seasons. And so there's those periods and times when there are births, marriages, deaths, all kinds of things happen in a relationship that trigger challenges that we weren't expecting. So if you have anything you'd like to share about those times after 5 years that you ran into a challenge and how you overcame it, please share with us.
I don't mind sharing. I sure don't mind sharing. We had two huge challenges that faced our marriage. Well, two. Those three are one challenge, but one of the biggest challenges. My wife's mom had passed away right before we got married, and then my mom passed away not too long ago, and so there's no grandmother for us, and so it's hard. That was one of the biggest things that we had to face, and then really even bigger than that was the fact of having children. I remember, you know, even speaking to some young couples when they talk about getting married, we say, you know, go have children as much as you can, because you never know what problems may come down the road. And we struggled with how many miscarriages we had? We ended up having 3 miscarriages after 5 or 6 years of trying first, and then 3 miscarriages trying to have kids, and then having the doctor say that, you know, my wife wouldn't have any kids. And so, you know, when you don't have that parent, and especially I know my wife went through it, because, you know, there's not that mother to lean on, you know, there is not that person that brought you into the world to caress and encourage. And so I had to be there for her for that. And that was hard because I didn't know how, you know. So you never know what type of things life will bring you. And that's why I say you always have to remember to, you know, to cherish each other and spend that time with each other, because you never know what's the next stage of life. You know, we never thought when getting married, on that day that we got married, you know, that we would have a struggle having children. Right. That was never in my mind, you know, and that really shouldn't be in anybody's mind. But, you know, you're standing up there, you're full of emotion, you're full of love, you're on cloud 9, but you don't know what's around the corner, what's around the season. And so those are the things why I say at the very beginning, you know, you have to stay close, stay deep, because you never know the roller coaster of life that's about to happen.
Right. And that's why you got to make sure when you get married, you can't marry just anybody. You got to marry somebody who has a relationship with God, because, you know, like he said, we lost, you know, the 3 babies. We had the 2 miscarriages and the 1 ectopic. And for me as a woman, that had the possibility to destroy you, because you're married for 7 years, and every time you go to the family reunions in the house for Christmas, why y'all ain't got no kids? What's going on? What you doing? You know, just about every time somebody would ask you that could do something to you. Mm-hmm. But I have a good husband who's grounded in God. And one day I was standing in the kitchen cooking and I was crying. I said, what do we do? And without hesitation, he said, we move forward. We move forward. So it wasn't that I'm not going to bring a cupcake to your pity party. We trust God. We believe in God. We're going to move. Now, I know he was hurting just like I was, but he encouraged me and said, we keep moving. In other words, let God give us beauty for our ashes. We have to move. Mm-hmm. We cannot stay here because God cannot bless us here. We've got to move toward the blessing. We've got to keep pressing to what God has for us. And then lo and behold, we get pregnant with Olivia. Mm-hmm. Then we get pregnant with the twins. So it's like God came back and restored everything that we thought we lost. So we were without kids for 7 years, true, but God came in and closed that gap right on up. It's like, what happened them 7 years? I don't even remember not having them because they all over the place. You know, so what we thought we lost, God came back and restored and gave us more than what we asked for. Mm-hmm.
But you know, I want to say this, and I say this a lot to people. God rewards you for your faithfulness in your marriage. And a lot of times we don't understand that. When we do what he expects us to do as he ordained marriage, being true to each other, working together, communicating together, continuing to move forward, he will honor that. Now, I can tell y'all a story. When we first got married, Danny was working for Leon County Schools, and his bring home check,
Please don't tell him.
bring home, was $786 a month. I was working for the state, bringing home $495, and we had the mitigated goal to be living in Worthington Park. At that time, was a luxury apartment. The rent was $280 a month. But it was in our faithfulness to each other, our commitment to each other, as he continued to elevate us, he kept giving us promotions. And that's the thing that will come through your marriage if you stay true to what you said on day one.
So if I could,
Some people's mouths hanging open.
Darrick want to say something.
I want to say, so, you know, we, so the early years of our marriage, we were similar to Marcus and Lasagna. We were, my wife actually got really, really sick and had to have a myomectomy because of fibroids. And we found out because she had many passing out spells. And when they finally figured it out, the doctor came in a room and told her she couldn't have kids. He said, I can't promise you can have them. If you want to, you could try and see what happens. And she was broken, and I was broken as well without words. But I remember her making a comment like, "Can our marriage last if I can't give you kids?" Wow. And I never thought about it because I loved her regardless, and I didn't marry her with the thought of kids. I loved her regardless, and so it never crossed my mind if we couldn't have kids, our marriage would be in trouble. But I also didn't understand from her perspective what that meant. If not being able to give her husband kids. And so the Lord blessed. A year later, our son came, but that was very tumultuous because I could see not only her brokenness, but there were times we would have conversations and she sometimes would even lift up her head to talk to me because she was ashamed. And I never realized the pain and the agony of it all. That was hard. I'll add to, when you asked about obstacles, my desire when I went to school, I was gonna go to school to be a lawyer. And so, you know, I could argue with the best of them. And I entered to my marriage. Every time we had a disagreement, I saw it as we were in court and I'm going to win. I'm going to get the verdict. And I was doing that successfully. And then one night, literally one night, we were in a heated argument. I would call it heated fellowship, but it was, I was giving it to her. Okay. And she literally in the middle of the argument walked out the room. Now, Marcus and Gabriel from Atlanta, I'm from Los Angeles. And what you don't do in LA is turn your back on somebody in a conversation. And I went like full speed after her in the conversation. I'm all at it. And she never said anything. Like she literally walked away, never returned around, never acknowledged me. And I was running so far behind her that I hit my foot on the edge of our bed. It's one of those things where you hit it and the pain don't catch you until a little bit later. I remember being on the ground, and she came out and looked at me with like this look of, you better leave God's child alone. But I remember the Lord asking me a simple question of, if you win the argument but ruin your wife, did you really win? And literally, I never thought about me winning the arguments, how it was doing to her. And it was one of those things. And so for me, it became a situation, as Faithia mentioned, of being able to listen. And that was very, very hard because my approach was, I'm starting the conversation right, and I'm going to end the conversation right, and you're going to be okay. And my wife's from Tallahassee. And so, that was a challenge. And the third and final thing I'll tell you that was a challenge was, we talked about keeping our circles tight. I will just say out loud to anybody who's listening, never be ashamed of considering marriage counseling. Your marriage don't have to be in trouble, but sometimes you need people who just don't know you but somebody who literally is trained in this area. And because, you know, we're Christians, I'm blessed to be a pastor, and that makes her a first lady. There are times when the people think you got the ideal marriage. And so you're trying to please the people. And so never be ashamed to go to counseling, never be ashamed to keep a counselor on speed dial, never be ashamed to be honest and transparent. There were things we both brought into our marriage from our childhood. I know personally for me that I had suppressed. And, you know, and I could tell me I'm good to go, man. I was great with giving counsel. And then it started rearing itself and later on in our marriage. And it was a scary situation because there were things where I had forgotten about these things and they started coming back up. And my wife has always been very supportive, but the person who was the closest to you, usually the one getting the most punches. Mm-hmm. They're not physical punches. It's just, they're the ones that Faye mentioned, you're not talking to each other, whatever it may be. And those things are challenging because as God blesses you in scary blessings, it get to a point where you feel like you can't talk to people. And so now, you know, you start secluding yourself in that regard. And so you need to express yourself, to explode, but you don't trust nobody. And that became a real obstacle because we just weren't having those conversations, open and honesty. And so I would leave every conversation like, I won, she lost, let's move on. And I was wounding her and didn't realize it.
And like Shell mentioned earlier, she said she's big on communication. Out of the two of us, I'm not the talker. I tell anybody that. But there are times when, like, you have to have the hard conversations. And every day you wake up, the sun's not going to shine. You're not going to hold hands on the beach. Like, what the TV is giving you is not real life. That's not reality. And also, I could say another challenge is when, with his career, and because of who he is, there are days when you say, can I just go in the store and nobody knows me? Can I just be seen by nobody and nobody says, oh, you're Darrick McGhee's wife? No, my name is Tikia McGhee. I am married to Darrick McGhee. But there are, since his career has been growing and the church is growing, sometimes it can be a struggle. Like almost like identity, like we're married, but I do still have my own identity.
And in fact, Aunt Faye, if I could just say this, I'm sorry. And that's key because Dr. Faye, thank you, Auntie to me. This is important because the hardest thing for me wasn't cheering my wife on. Hardest thing for me was figuring out how to encourage her to leap, and I'll be there to support you. Because she's always been good at being a supportive wife and encourager on my side, but there were things that I saw that she was doing or needed to be doing, and I wanted to encourage her in that regard, and do it in a manner, as she mentioned, where she's Tikia, and I don't mind being your plus one in this regard. And I'll say again, the last week, everybody, you can't sex everything away either. Amen. I think that's important. People, I don't care, you just can't do that. You got to be able to talk at some point.
I want to, I guess, go back down memory lane. A lot of times our family of origins have a lot to do with what we bring into a marriage. I came from a poor family where there was a lot of dissension. And so when dissension came up in my family, I would run and hide. I would walk away. I would go into a closed room. I did not want to be a part of any conflict. So when conflict came in our home, when I said, I don't want to talk about it, I did not want to talk about it. And so I would go to bed at night when my partner wanted to get this thing out. Let's resolve it. I could actually snore and not resolve it at all. I said, I don't want to hear it. That's it. But it was one night that I woke up. It was 2 a.m. in the morning where she took a scale, a weighing scale, and she was so angry because I was not willing to resolve our dispute that she ripped it apart. She ripped it apart to the point where her hands were bleeding. Then the next morning, I woke up and being the color that she is, her eyes were swollen. And I said to this, how long am I going to continue in this vein and allow this to continue in our relationship? But it was an uncle who said this to me, and I say this to everybody. He said, never close your eyes and be in dissension with your mate, because you never know who's not going to wake up that next morning. And it was then that I understood, whenever she wanted to talk, whether I wanted to or not, it was my responsibility as her mate to sit and talk that thing out.
Thank you for that, all of you. I heard you, Pastor Whitfield, when you said most of us come from our environment, but I wanted to emphasize that we are all a product of our formative years. And those formative years start in the belly when we're in our mother's womb. And even though we don't realize most times as we're going through life that we're carrying those experiences, those unconscious issues and thoughts with us, we are carrying them. And there are certain things that happen in our life that will trigger an outward expression of it. And so many times in marriages, that's what happens. We've got God created these two unique beings who have come together now to form this union. But each one comes bringing their own experiences, their own unconscious thoughts. And so what I want to ask you, all of you, in your marriages, we've already heard some of it, but what have you learned about you? Not about your spouse, but what have you learned about you as a consequence of the marriage?
Who are you talking to, Gerald?
Everybody.
Everybody. I heard you call Gerald
let's start with Gerald.
He's sitting back in the quiet.
As you all were talking, my mind went back to an issue that arose with my wife and I. We had a conversation, and for those of you who know me, I'm a mama's boy. Don't smile so hard, Tikia. I'm a mama's boy. And my wife and I were having a conversation, and early in our marriage, maybe year 2, 1 or 2, and she asked the question, if something were to happen, who would you lean towards, for lack of a better term? Being a mama's boy, being young, just getting married, of course I said, what you mean? You could walk off of me at any time, but my mama will always be there. And so the worst question, the worst answer I could have given her was, I would choose my mama. And that ripped her to the core. And learning through the years, I had to go back and apologize for that, because learning and growing in marriage, you learn that you become one. Standing at the altar and hearing the minister say, no more twain, but one flesh, those kinds of things. You hear those things, but do we really become one flesh at that time? I look at marriage as I look at salvation. It's a growth process. It's something that we grow into. And so when we look at what has that done for me, I can really say that marriage has transitioned my life. I've grown as a man, I've grown as a person, I've grown emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, of course, because if a marriage is going to work, God has to be the center.
Amen.
There's no way around it. There's no way around it. God has to be the center. And if he's not the center, Pastor Stanley Walker, my father in ministry, I was on this call today, said something years ago. And he said, I'd rather have God and not need him than to need him and not have him. I never understood that in my earlier years. But over 24 years, of marriage, I've learned exactly what that meant in various instances of my life, more especially with marriage, because there's no way we would have made it for 23 years of marriage had it not been for our relationship with God. 24 years, with our relationship with God. Truth of the matter is, we probably, if it had not been for God, we would have been divorced if the courthouse would have been open that Saturday. Hallelujah. To God. Thanks be unto God. They operate Monday through Friday, and it will close that Saturday. And so by the time they opened up Monday morning at 8 o'clock, we had made amends. And here we are, 24 years later.
One of the things that I would like to incorporate into that is we did come from two different backgrounds. When I met Gerald, I saw some things that I was not accustomed to. And later in life, I realized that it was not my fault. It was not even my parents' fault. It was a generational thing. And it just kind of filtered and filtered and filtered. Well, by the time the filter opened up is where I felt it between the two of us in the marriage. I would go around his family and they were huggers, they were kissers, and they would say, I love you, all of these affectionate things. And it wasn't that my parents didn't love me, it's just that they didn't know how to show that. So when I met him, one of his aunts greeted me and she kissed me on the cheek. And I'm like, lady, you better get away from me, because I'm thinking on the other side, wherein she was being affectionate. And so what I did learn is that love was in me, but I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to give it. And so as time went on, it got in me. And oh boy, when it got in me, it really got in me. And so I think that's where the part of me where communication really dropped in me. Because there are times I want to talk, and most men, not all men, but most men, they don't like to communicate long. They'll communicate, they don't like to do it long. I like to do it long. Just talk. So many times your point has come across, but it's just something about women. We just like to talk. So anyway, that's why communication is my passion, because I feel like when you don't communicate, don't do that. When you don't communicate, those problems come in. That's where we allow the enemy to come in, because we close our ears to what's necessary, what's important. And lastly, in marriage, we look at marriage as two people when it's really not. Marriage consists of three people: God, husband, and the wife.
Triangle.
So when we include him in it first and keep him in it, then we can handle all of these issues because he will undergird us and allow us to go through, deal with, overcome, outlast, and triumph in our marriage.
Before others share what they've learned, I just wanted to highlight what McGill stated in terms of God being the third person in the marriage and in terms of communication. I think one thing that couples must learn is that they are not God. That's why God has to be in a relationship, which means that we can't read each other's minds. Even though we begin after years to kind of think we know and we can kind of tell what the other person is thinking and feeling, we still don't know what's inside the other person's mind, inside the body. And the only way we will know is if we communicate, which means we have to state what we need, ask for what we need, state what we want, ask for what we want, and actually talk to one another. So we cannot assume that position of God. Let God be God, and we talk to one another.
Well, you know, I think that Arnett and Pam are probably the only couple on the panel that can relate to what I'm getting ready to say. When we got married, there was actually nothing available for us. There was no manual. There was no premarital. There was no couples ministry. There were no couples retreat.
Wrong.
We had to go into a marriage, trial and error. And I promise you, we had some trials and error.
My Lord.
Now, even though we knew that both God was in both of us, but I'm gonna be honest, there were some times that I said, now Jesus, you stand right there. I got this. I got this. And that's what I had to overcome. It took years. I don't believe I really saw our marriage take a turn for the better until we renewed at 25. And if I have to say anything, that's when I realized just how much work marriage took. Now, there were some things that God took us through that brought us closer together, but at least once a month, if not a little more than that, I would say it was so bad at Philadelphia. Every Wednesday night, we went home from choir rehearsal, man.
Ooh, Lord.
Every Wednesday night. Every Wednesday night. And I mean, and then when you went home mad from choir rehearsal, and we want to do, you know, see, here's the thing. When you're in a family church and the choir was consisting of my mama, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, and they would want to talk, and he was young. So instead of saying, I don't better be quiet, I'm trying to teach this song, he would wait until I opened my mouth and said, could you be quiet? And everybody else talking.
She had to be my example.
Yeah, but was that fair to me? That wasn't fair to me. But we made it, and it was just a lot to work through. When I look back, I know the avenues we had to come over.
But my sister, you would include in that, it took you all having to have some hard conversations about those issues, right?
True. Very much so.
Yeah.
We had to talk about the role that I played as a minister of music.
And we also have to keep in mind too, Danny and I, we didn't get to tell our little story. We met in college too. And we dated. And then we weren't really girlfriend, boyfriend, you know, he would go to fraternity functions and I would be his date. We separated for 2 years. When he came back, I was like, who damn is you? You're so stubborn. What happened?
You don't know what I had to go through.
what happened? This is not the same person. So this is what I had to deal with.
But we made it.
But we still made it, you know?
And I would add that you all learned a lot about yourselves. That's why I'd like to hear from all of you. What did you learn? Because for those who are listening, the point that, and the Whitfields and I, we have a lot of discussions about this, that we want persons to hear you talk about is, if you don't learn what you bring to the table, how you're contributing, then the dysfunction continues. The cycle continues until you begin to understand, oh, this is where I am contributing to this issue. This is what I need to do different.
Can I say something about that?
It looked like she wanted to say something.
Oh, okay.
She looked like she wanted to talk.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that I had to deal with was unrealistic expectations of my husband. Although he was my best friend and we had a great relationship, he could not fulfill every need that I had. I still had to have a relationship with friends. I still had to have a relationship with family. I still had to have, work relationships. I had to, and so a lot of times when I didn't feel like he would come through for me the way I thought he should in certain instances, he couldn't be everything to me. He wasn't God, And so sometimes I would put that responsibility on him and get mad when he didn't come through, But I had to learn that he doesn't have the capacity to fulfill every single need that I have.
I'm gonna be a little bit more practical. In the early going, I couldn't be Dillard's. I couldn't be Gabe. No, I couldn't be Moss Brothers. I went back there on some of y'all. I could be Moss Brothers, and we had to understand that, no, that dress might be really nice and it looked good on you when you came out the dressing room, but I'm gonna look at this price tag and we're gonna wait until we get on the clearance rack and then we can deal with it from that standpoint. And those were sometimes some contentious issues because we just got to be practical about it. But that's one of the things that we had to come to understand about both. And just like she had those things that she had those expectations that she didn't feel like I could fulfill it. And likewise, it was reversed. There were some things that I knew that I had to come to understand that that's not going to be something that she's going to be able to fulfill for me on a continuous basis. And so now I go out and play golf every now and then, and that's, you have to do that.
And that's not to say that your spouse, there are certain responsibilities we have as spouses, but it's unrealistic to think that, they're your all in all, because that's God. That's God's job to be your all in all. He mentioned the Dillard situation. I was in a professional situation when we got married. He was still finishing school. And one day he actually told me, I was getting ready to go shopping at the mall. Our house was not too far from the mall, and our apartment rather. And I said, I'm getting ready to go shopping. I kind of want to pick up a new dress or something. And he said, you don't really need to do that right now, Pam. Excuse me? And I turned around and looked at him and said, I think I work every day, And so, but I had to come to a point where I had to recognize this is my head and, kind of understand that he wasn't trying to govern over me, but he was trying to, be realistic about where we were. And sometimes it's hard to be that submission part, that submission thing. Sometimes that can be hard. That was my thing, because I'm like, I've been working. I'm driving my Volvo, it's like, so sometimes you have to realize that submission is not a bad thing. Submission is really a good thing. And one of the ways that we went to a marriage retreat one time, and one of the things they said to one of the presenters said that the good thing about being a wife is because you can duck low enough that when God comes through with the hammer, you out of the way. It's gonna hit him because he's the head of the house. And that's who God is looking at. And so I learned to submit and feel good about it, you know? And
I heard somebody else wanting to say something.
I think it was our brother Marcus. Was it you?
Oh yeah, I definitely. I mean, you guys have said it very eloquently. One of the biggest things that I would say is, especially in learning, and here comes one of the kids. Go back in there. There you go. Hey, I love them. They bless them. But anyway,
We try.
one of the things I would definitely say is that you learn when in marriage is the fact that you learn who you are. And this is one of the biggest things I've always seen in marriage is that you don't really become who you are until after you get married. People always say that, you know, the person that you marry on the altar has been the person who's been trying to please you or trying to be all that for you. And then once you get married, all of a sudden you didn't really see who they are. But the truth of the matter is you really find out who you are too. One of the biggest enemies that I always will say enemies, one of the biggest giants that you always think you have to face in marriage is yourself. Marriage also, the biggest part of marriage that it reveals who you are and that you have to change. When you decide to get married, you decided that you are not complete who you are. But a lot of times we don't want to change. This is why I think, I don't know if maybe even Ms. McGill said it, that men don't like to communicate because we never did that. And so all of a sudden when we get married, we think, okay, well, that's fine. I didn't communicate before, but that's the part of you that has to change. You know, men don't like to sometimes be affectionate, you know, and so one of the biggest things about marriage I always see is that you learn how to change yourself. You learn how to realize, even though I've done this way from 0 to 24 or 0 to whatever the time I get married, this is not going to work for this household. That's why I love what Lasagna said. It's not the bringing of two worlds together, it's the abandoning of two worlds so that a new world might be formed. And in that new world that's formed, you have to change who you are if you're going to make it work. Because again, like you said, none of us grew up together. None of us came up under the same household. So what you thought you do all the way through life is not going to work when you add somebody else's life, their values, their prayers, and everything else into the mix. And so two things, that's the first thing I was going to say, is that marriage reveals who you are. And the second thing, I think everybody's saying it, is putting God first and the practicality of what that means. We always say, you know, we got to have God first in our marriage, but really, what does that mean? And a lot of times, and especially in men, we tend to let the relationship of God be housed on our wife, on the woman. Let that, and the woman is the only one that's praying, and the woman is the only one that's reading her word, and the woman is the only one that's in the prayer closet. When in fact, having that three-person relationship in our marriage simply always means, and also means, we have to, as men, be the priest in our home. You know, I'm never going to have my wife reading the word more than me. I'm never going to have my wife praying more than me. That's something that we're not going to, as a man, I cannot have, you know, and we always talk about being a man is being a priest. So I'm up every morning praying. I'm up every morning worshiping God because, like you said, I think Ms. Moore said it, you know, God is holding us as men as responsible. And we can't be the ones that's sitting back and saying, well, God, I'm going to let my wife carry that part of the mantle or that mantle of the relationship. It has to be us when it comes to relationship. We say we got to have God first, but we really, as men, put God first in our life enough to where our wife trusts us enough to submit. I think somebody said that word submission. That's a whole different word. That's a whole different lane. That can be here. We can be all night for that. But is our relationship with God so true and so heartfelt? It's not routine. It's not what we grew up in. You know, I grew up in the Baptist church, but after a while, did I find God for myself? And are you seeking God for yourself as a man so that your wife can trust you enough to submit? So those are the biggest things that I learned in relationship for myself, is that I got to have a relationship with God myself. I can't leave it on her. I can't leave it on my wife. And the second thing, it reveals who you are.
That's good.
Is there anybody else that wants to address that question before we?
I'll add. So two of the things that I learned about myself was, as Mr. McGill was saying earlier, if someone were to ask me that question 10 years ago, who would you rely on first? Just like Mr. McGill, I would have said my mom, my family, because coming from a divorced family where I had a very strong mother, I had a very strong grandmother who were both single parents, raised their kids, we're all successful. I felt like if Gabriel's here, wonderful. If he's not, that's okay too. I got this. I know my family's always going to be there. So I had to learn leave and cleave. When you get married, it's about you and your spouse, not about your family, not about your friends. It's about the two of you, and then ultimately God leading that relationship. Another thing that I had to learn with that is my marriage is also bigger than just the two of us. With us having a 10-year-old little girl, well, she'll be 10 next month, and I'm pregnant with our second daughter, I have to be that example for our daughters, so that way when they grow up, they'll know what being a wife means if they choose to get married as well. Like I joke with my daughter all the time about certain things. For example, if the garbage needs to be taken out, just using that as an example, we'll say, oh no, that's not our job, that's daddy's job. Just things like that. So but with that, she learns that your husband is there to provide for you, your husband is there to protect you, your husband is there to be that spiritual covering, to cover all those different aspects. And if I didn't learn to submit, as Ms. Moore was saying, then she wouldn't learn that lesson either. And that generational, I can do this by myself, would continue. And that's not something that I want for my daughters. So I had to change me so that ultimately I can do my part in making our marriage better, and then making it better for our daughters when they decide to get to that point in their lives as well.
Well, if I had to say what I learned about me, I would say it was really learning how to tone Rhoda down. There was a time that I said what I wanted to who I wanted, how I wanted. Amen. I did not care how it came out. I did not care how you took it. It was what it was. But Danny had a softer spirit. And in time, we took on each other's personalities. I became a little more softer. He was the person that didn't even know how to tell people no. I'll tell them for you. But now he knows how to tell people no in a, diplomatic manner. And I am very cautious of how I talk to people, because I don't want to have to go back and apologize for anything that was out of order. And I don't mind doing that. But I feel that because no one knows what's around the corner, if you go ahead and be selective and use gentler words from the start, you can get your point across, but it doesn't have to be in a nasty way where you have to go back and say, hey, I'm so sorry about what I said. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And I'm like that with him. Going back to something that Pam said, best friend. Let me tell you about the best friend and the lover. You will put a reading on your lover, but not your best friend. You will not. You care about what your best friend thinks. So you're going to watch what you say to them. But your lover, if you marry somebody just on attraction and that's it, you will put a reading on them with the quickness. But I'm going to watch what I say to him, because when we close our eyes, if he doesn't wake up the next morning, I will have no regrets. And that's what people need to realize.
I'll jump on that. As she said before, we were so different when we first got into a relationship. She was very vocal, and I wanted a quiet.
He wanted one he could control.
I wanted a quiet person. I don't need you to say nothing. But I had to learn something. God made us all unique individuals. And it's not up to me to take away that he has formed or purposed her to be, not to take that away from her. But as she said, down through the years, we've seen those personalities. Though they're different, we've seen them come together. And it made it easier now for us to really have pleasant conversations, whereas they were up in the, oh boy. But I think we've had an opportunity to learn each other and to grow together.
But God.
Can I add also that I can say that for my husband and I've had to learn how to back down, and I've had to learn how to not add fuel to the fire. Because coming into this, like I said, and I was one who, and I've heard this too, someone mentioned this too, I was not going to lose. So whatever the argument was coming, whatever you have, I have just as much for you. I had to learn not to add fuel to the fire. And I've learned that over years. It took time to learn that, because you pray about a certain situation, but then I found that I would put myself right back in that situation. So I had to learn to do something different. And listening to him, a lot of times all he wanted to hear was, because I would never admit I was wrong, but he would want to hear, I'm sorry. So I had to learn not to add fuel. I had to learn when to let it go. And I had to learn how to be able to say, I'm sorry.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. Amen. We are right at 6:30, but I want to say to each of you, thank you. Thank you again. I know there's absolutely no one who has listened to this tonight and have not received quite a bit of wisdom, insight, and even some new tools for their marriage, and even some new tools in terms of what I should be looking for and how I should go about engaging my partner. So I want to thank each of you again for your transparency and your vulnerability. I don't know what the plans of the Whitfields are, but I believe this is just the beginning. I can't.
Absolutely.
It's ironic that you would say that, Dr. Faye.
Like this, and there's so much more to talk about. In fact, there were several questions that we had wanted to offer to you all to get into some more intricate areas. So I will leave it up to them in terms of the planning for the future. And again, remember, your stories are a sacred gift. It's a gift from God. And I thank you for sharing your stories with us. And so to all of those who have been with us tonight, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to you joining us again soon. We don't have the date yet, but it's
Well, it is something that we did discuss. And if everyone that is sitting on this panel right now is in agreement, we're looking at doing it again in 4 months in the month of March. And if you all would love to come back, we will invite you back so that we can
break. All right, we'll do it. If we're still in school, who knows?
Okay.
I think it's an opportunity for us to go even deeper.
Right.
As we look at our motto, marriage takes work.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all gleaned something from each other tonight, but it's an opportunity for us to really share more for others who are out there, who are thinking about marriage and what marriage really is, the seriousness of it. And then we're not getting in it because you're beautiful, you're fine, you're all of this. No, it's going to take more than that for your marriage to succeed. And so we want to come back and take it to another level as we look at how hard it is and the work that goes into making your marriage work.
I got a question though. Since we're coming back in 4 months, is there a goal that we should work on so we can discuss in 4 months?
Dr. Faye?
Well, we'll share that with you in the interim because I'm giving you some new titles. The Whitfield and we're going to discuss what I have several ideas, but I'd like to share it with them first. Make sure that you are a little more prepared, not completely, but this contemporaneous communication tonight, I believe, is much more fruitful because you came from your heart and you share with all of those who were listening exactly how you feel. So we're not going to give you exactly, but we'll give you a little bit of an idea.
So let me say to all of you who are part of this forum today, how much we are indebted to you. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being a part of this. And we look forward to what God will take us in the next forum 2021.
Amen. All right. Thank y'all.
Everybody, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
You got to watch slow until next time.
Oh, until next time.
Love hard
and work your marriage.
I love it.
All right. Thank you all.
You gonna press it?